Hi folks, my name is Mike Dobbs. I'm your host here in Government Matters over Focus Springfield. It's my good fortune to be able to present another conversation, a very timely conversation with our Congressman Richard Neal. Thanks very much for coming in, sir.
Thanks for your invitation, Mike.
Okay, so I've done my research. I got a bunch of questions because I try to stay on top of this stuff. It's very difficult. I was just mentioning to the congressman that we used to have a phrase, the 24-hour news cycle. Now it seems like it's the morning news cycle, the 8-hour news cycle, because things change and on such a rapid pace these days.
It's also policy that's being done on Truth Social.
Right.
Which doesn't have a lot of merit necessarily, but it grabs the media's attention.
And I have to say, the problem is those are easy stories to do.
No question.
Those are stories that just quote whatever the president is blathering about at 2 a.m., and now suddenly you have a story. It doesn't matter if what he's talking about is legitimate, it's just easy news, which I have a real problem with.
Look, the pattern is simple. There's the bombast, there's the critique, there's the modification, there's the retreat, and then there's the declaration of victory.
Right.
None of it meritorious, and two quick examples that come to mind. First, the tariffs have been haphazard in the way they've been implemented. Secondly, that announcement that there's a trade agreement with the United Kingdom, that's an agreement to begin talking about talks. And with China, there's still the 10% tariffs that were imposed. And my hunch is, despite what is being reported, China held its ground in that debate. So I think that for a lot of people who don't, as you've accurately described it, pay attention to news cycle, then I think there's a lot of misinformation out there. And clearly, I think I'd go so far as to say not only is it misinformation, but the intent is disinformation.
So we're going to circle back to tariffs because tariffs really confuse a lot of people, and they confuse a lot of people because of these stories that we got tariffs, now we got a pause. Now we got a partial pause, now we're going to have exemptions of those tariffs. I think for the American people, it's very difficult to figure out because of the nature of how this is being presented. But first, I just want to go what you guys just went through, which is the status of what has been called the Big Beautiful Bill. So I understand that it's going to be heading to the House Rules Committee next. That it got out of, and forgive me, I get these things confused, which committee it was. It got out of that committee, and it was only because a number of congressmen, Republican congressmen, voted present because they wanted to satisfy Speaker Johnson's timetable, even though they didn't want to support it because it wasn't cutting Medicare enough. And so what's your take on this bill? What do you see, knowing what's in it? How is it going to come out of the House and go to the Senate? Is it going to come out intact to what it is now, or do you think that's going to be further modifications?
Well, let's start with this. We spent 18 hours in the Ways and Means Committee trying to amend this colossal error. And during those 18 hours, I thought we did a really good job of parrying with them over what this means. This is a big, beautiful tax cut for billionaires. When you look at what are known in the tax world as distribution tables, which is the Bible of tax talk, then you get the chance to see who gets what. So somebody who made $1 million last year, they're going to pick up $87,000. If you made under 50, it's about $1 a day. This is reality. And they're trying to camouflage and disguise. I understand it. But there is no getting away from the basic fact this is a big tax cut for people at the top.
One element of all of this that stands out most in news coverage is the Medicare element, talking about making people work in order to get Medicare, and then talking about that there will be millions of people who will not be able to satisfy that requirement and will be booted off Medicare. Do I have that right?
Well, it's actually Medicaid.
Medicaid, I'm sorry.
No, the Medicare and Medicaid, they're both Great Society success stories. Thank God for Lyndon Johnson at the time. He signed both into law and helped to shape them. But Medicare is for those 65 and older. It's this great club you join the day you turn 65. And it assumes retirement at 65. Unlike a lot of other retirement plans, Social Security can be at 62 or 69, and private plans, depending on when you want to draw down the minimum distribution. But with Medicaid, that was supposed to be for poor children. And it has evolved, successfully so. So today, a lot of the Medicaid expenditure goes to nursing home care. This idea that you're going to resolve the federal debt by getting Medicaid recipients to go to work doesn't add up. In addition to which, the state of Georgia, which has practiced it, they've discovered that it costs more to implement the work requirement than it does in terms of cost savings. So the point, I think, on this is able-bodied people should go to work. I want them to go to work. And that was part of the welfare reform law of 1996. What I think is missed here is that the Medicaid proposal is really being undertaken for one purpose: to cut spending for people at the lower end of the economic spectrum so you can finance a tax cut for people at the top. This is not verbosity on my part. This is not hyperbolic talk. This is just exactly what's happening. And again, the distribution tables tell all. So again, since you raised it, Medicaid now is hospital employment. Our hospitals are the biggest employers everywhere. Bay State Medical Center, they're 67, 68% dependent on Medicare and Medicaid. You have in Holyoke probably 85% Medicare and Medicaid. You have at the Sisters of Providence at Mercy. You have probably 85% of the revenue comes from Medicare and Medicaid. And I call attention to that because if you're in Boston, they still have high percentages. They're well into the 60s too, but they also have private pays. And private pays contribute to what is no scale. So you can negotiate. In our region, these hospitals, again, as employer and employee giants, they are much dependent on Medicare and Medicaid. And the other part of this that's, I think, a remarkable achievement, after the Affordable Care Act, which the Ways and Means Committee wrote a lot of, we expanded Medicaid. That's what we did across the country. The idea was to share risk at an earlier age, get people into the healthcare system rather than sitting at home, afraid to go to a doctor because they can't pay for it, or afraid to go to a hospital because they can't pay for it. So the emergency room became the way that healthcare was supported and generated. The problem with that is it gets pretty pricey pretty fast. So we decided to legislate, to make law, and to come to grips with the idea that the Affordable Care Act has been successful.
You know this far better than I do, but I gotta ask this question. I do not understand the real politics of this. I've seen stories about Speaker Johnson's district in Louisiana having a very high
1/3
Medicaid. So you say to your constituents, I'm voting to take away something as vital as health care to you, or maybe greatly diminish it, whatever the case is. I don't understand that aspect of their politic. Do they assume their constituents are going to say, oh, okay, that's all right, we'll figure it out, as opposed to, well, wait a minute, how is this benefiting your constituents? I don't understand that part of this political equation. Are they simply ignoring it, or are they depending on their electorate not rising up against this kind of thing?
They are subservient to whatever the president says. They have no fundamental understanding of our constitutional obligations, which is to review and oversee the President of the United States regardless of party. I challenged Bill Clinton when I thought it was appropriate. I challenged Barack Obama when I thought it was appropriate, and I challenged Joe Biden. We shape better legislation because of it. This notion, once the legislation's sent over, that they just have to accept it, is, for me, unconscionable. And in the Speaker's constituency, 1 out of 3 people is on Medicaid. How about West Virginia? It's 40%. How about Missouri? Again, 1/3 of the people of Missouri. So this legislation is likely to be radically reshaped when it comes back from the Senate after they have their take on it. But there is no getting away from the elementary fact here, and that is cut spending on health care so that you can justify a tax cut for people at the top. And you know what else is amazing about this? The Congressional Budget Office has said that you need to clip Medicaid by $880 billion to justify what they want to do with their tax cut. And I think that it's also amazing that the Republican Party, which has always suggested that it was the party of fiscal rectitude, they are adding again $4 trillion to the federal debt. So they get on Monday to complain about the size of the debt, and then on Tuesday they get to add more to it. I think that people need to open their eyes as to what's happening with the big, beautiful bill. We're at $36 trillion in debt. Now, when they say, well, this was because of spending, you mean on defense, which they all voted for? You mean the pandemic, which they all voted for? Relief, which worked, by the way? Their attitude is you can never increase revenue, you can only cut taxes. And I think that whether it's Moody's or if you look at some of the other scoring agencies, which have great reputation, this is exactly what's playing out.
Didn't Moody's just downgrade the United States for the first time? And
they did. So all three of the ratings agencies now have downgraded American debt.
Wouldn't that be a red flag?
You would think it would have been for a Republican Party in the Eisenhower years.
Right.
Or the Bush 1 years.
Right.
And now it's just the tax cuts that are more important to them than anything. And, you know, it's Bush Jr., $1.3 trillion in 2001, another trillion in 2003. And if you add to it Trump's tax cuts in 2017, where did the benefit go? It went to wealthy people. And the other argument that they continue to make is that this promotes growth. So their pathology for tax cuts has now superseded the theology that they have, that tax cuts pay for themselves. You can't find a mainstream economist in Washington, or for that matter, just about anywhere in the United States, that will say tax cuts pay for themselves. I think it's the Cato Institute, which is a libertarian think tank.
Right.
No friend of Democrats. They've said this will provide 0.6% in economic growth.
I was watching CNN before I came in, and they were talking about a new report about the consumer confidence, and it's plummeting. People are scared because they don't know where things are going. They don't know how much things are going to cost.
Well, as we speak, the president threatened Walmart over the weekend. When the head of Walmart, their margin of success is generally, I think, in that 3% range. They're the biggest employer in the United States. And when Walmart says we are now going to have to raise prices because of the tariffs, the president threatens them and tells them that they have to eat their profit. And the Secretary of the Treasury, he is much more, how would I suggest that? He's much more careful, judicious in his word choice. I was watching him over the weekend, and he was anything but confident of the measures that he was embracing.
Which, when I read that this morning about the exchange between the president or his reaction to the Walmart announcement, I'm thinking, okay, how many months have we heard the American people are not going to be affected by the tariffs? You know, it's going to be paid by the country of origin, which we all know was a lie.
Before we invade Liechtenstein?
Yeah, and now it's like he's saying to Walmart, oh yeah, you have to pay this. And guess what? You need to pay this. So you need to have it come out of your profit margin rather than to pass this along to consumers. It's like the logic of all of this is so faulty and so contradictory. It just amazes me that anybody is putting any stock into this guy any longer.
I think Marx called it descapital.
Yes. So as you just mentioned, you anticipate this bill to be altered once it goes to the Senate. The phrase that I saw in the news story that I read this morning was they were going to take it and turn it into, quote, bite-sized pieces. So it sounds to me like they are going to break up what has been written into various issues, various subjects, and look at more micro than macro, perhaps.
So that would take you back to the Lott years when he was the majority leader in the U.S. Senate. What they decided was that because their tax cuts were very unpopular, we always win the House after they put their tax position in place.
Right.
I mean, that's just reality. Because it is unpopular, and people did come to figure it out a bit belatedly. But what Lott did, he broke out their tax cut in 201 and 203, and that's where we started to hear about the marriage penalty. So they would try to address a high-profile part of the tax package to divert attention away from who was going to get what in the deliberation. So I'm not surprised that they would embrace that. The Senate has been noticeably more cool to this proposal. They have 3-seat advantage in the Senate. This could be jeopardized for them next year, even though they should be heavy favorites to hold on to the Senate. We should be heavy favorites to win the House. But they now know that they can't embrace these Medicaid cuts because it would cause them to lose some of these Senate seats.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There is so much information that flows, and we touched at this at the beginning. I just want to run a theory of mine past you, and the theory is we talk about we're going to take over Greenland. We talk about we're going to take over the Panama Canal.
We're busy.
Yeah. This morning it was we're going to launch federal investigations into Oprah and Beyonce. So the reason I bring this stuff up is, to me, this sounds like a political genius who understands I can say outrageous stuff and get all of the media and the attention on this outrageous stuff. That is never going to happen. I'm willing to bet you lunch, sir, that we're never going to be flying the American flag over Greenland, and we're not going to be taking over the Panama Canal. I just don't see that happening.
It was pretty clear from that last election in Canada, they have no interest in becoming part of the United States.
Exactly. So do you think this is deliberate?
Part of it is flood the zone, but what happened in Canada, what happened in Australia, they're good examples. The Liberal Party in both countries, they were scheduled to get beat. They won comfortably, and it's because they've chosen the nationalist position of standing up to the United States. We've not had a better friend than Canada.
No.
We've not had a better friend than Australia. Why would we be isolated from them, and why would we be voting with North Korea at the United Nations and standing with Russia against Ukraine? Clearly, the American people reject that point of view, and I don't know anybody who accepted the president's suggestion that Ukraine started the war. So we were told this was going to be resolved on day one. We were told that the situation in Gaza was going to be resolved on day one. The truth is, it's just flood the zone. Put out as much information as you can and hope to divert attention from the real issues. Right. And back to the point you raised earlier, Mike, this is the other consideration. In the news cycle now, he does not have a filter. He just goes to Truth Social, puts out this information that Canada wants to be the 51st state and that Greenland wants to be part of the United States and that the Panama Canal should be returned to the United States. There's no support for it. There is no information indicating that any of them are interested in this.
Yep. I just remember how when President Obama assumed office, they took his BlackBerry away from him.
Yeah, for good reason.
And not because he was being irresponsible with it, but because this is not the way a president of the United States communicates policy, that is through social media blasts. Unfortunately, we're seeing that supposedly happen now.
Virtually every member of Congress has had a challenge with social media that is largely coming from from Russia. And we've been forewarned that between China and Russia, we should be very careful with anything that we do in terms of public information. And it's also pretty clear that they are very good now at intercepting information, and you have to be very guarded about all of it. And I thought that when President Obama, who really was the first president to really utilize social media, he was not happy when they said, we're taking away your BlackBerry, but it was the right call.
Sure.
And because the most innocent conversation, and I'm not sure Signal was the most innocent conversation with the Secretary of Defense. I mean, how about dialing into the Atlantic magazine and suggesting that you didn't know anything about it?
Okay, just to use the phrase that you used a few minutes ago, flip that, and if that had been a Democratic defense head doing something as stupid as that, politically his head would be in a pike someplace. I mean, that would never have been tolerated.
Well, they would have been saying that Obama was born in Kenya.
Yeah.
That's where I think that's the point we've reached in dialogue across the country now with disinformation and misinformation. And the idea that some of these influencers have the kind of sway that they have with the White House is beyond the realm of reality.
So I said I wanted to get back to tariffs because this morning, in preparing for this interview, I simply did the search, what is the status of tariffs right now? And it was, I saw an interesting piece that was written like 2 days ago from The Guardian talking about this tariff, that tariff. And what fascinated me was what tariffs are on hold, what tariffs are actually in place. There are then exemptions to certain things. For instance, like auto parts, there's an exemption on auto parts. And the other economic impact thing is I then did a search for what is the status of TikTok, since so many Americans are making money off of TikTok, establishing businesses. And supposedly TikTok goes away June 19th, but the story that I read said it all depends upon if the president wants to extend this again. Tariff seems to be, for the person who is not dealing with it as you are firsthand as a member of Congress, enormously confusing about what's on, what's not, what products are being taxed, what products are not being taxed.
Who gets to go into the White House and make their case that they shouldn't be taxed? That's another part of the consideration. So the president has slowly discovered the connection between Canada and Detroit. They are neighbors. There are very few automobiles anywhere that don't require assembly with parts that are made in foreign jurisdictions. I call attention to that because I get the argument about trade flows and trade imbalances. But we run a surplus with Australia, who runs a debt with China. We actually, in terms of services with the UK, we have a surplus. They are reluctant to embrace American beef. The French are reluctant because of chlorine treatment of chicken to embrace some of our products. I get those arguments. We should be heralding the fact that the American farmer is the best in the world. Understood. But this notion that tariffs were the remedy for all problems, real and perceived, really is not working very well for us. And I think that all of a sudden, somebody is able to go to the White House and say, well, you just pull back on these tariffs for us. That's not policy. That's a special consideration. And when you look at this issue as it's rounded out, it's pretty clear that it's not working.
Locally, I know of many instances where the DOGE cuts have made an impact on small businesses, on farms,
On Tesla.
on social programs. My wife is just retiring from her role as the executive director of the Community Survival Center, an emergency food pantry in Indian Orchard. The Food Bank of Western Mass just got $400,000 cut. She's seeing increases in people who are concerned about their food status coming to the center. All of this is sort of, it's like a snowball running downhill. It's getting bigger and bigger. Are you hearing from constituents here about not taxes, but tariff issues? Like
Yes.
suddenly they're discovering that raw materials that they need for a manufacturing facility, they can't get at the same price, that type of thing?
And they're reluctant to say much in the business sector. But the proposals that are going to come now to SNAP for cuts,
Right.
it is, again, it's unconscionable that this is all being done so that we can cut taxes for people at the very top. And, you look at the two examples you used, there are a lot of people that never thought they'd be using a food distribution site like that.
Yes.
There's also a little bit of an embarrassment for some of them that they feel that they never thought they would need this service. And I look at a country that's been blessed with the bounty that we have. We should be able to make sure everybody has sufficient nutrition every single day. And then I look at some of these proposals on the Inflation Reduction Act, which is singularly the most important piece of climate legislation in the history of the world. $412 billion worth of tax credits. And the president is threatening to walk away from all of this, or from a lot of it. I don't understand for the life of me how some of these congressmen and congresswomen from red states and red congressional districts will let that happen. There was a debate the other day, and a fellow from, I think, Indiana, he's got a $6 billion initiative in his congressional district. I don't know how he's going to be able to walk away from it. So all of these achievements that we have, and let's call attention to Joe Biden's health for a moment as well.
Yes.
And we wish him well. Far better president than he's getting credit for at the moment.
I think history will treat him well.
History's going to treat him well. And these were massive success stories that we had in terms of the American economy. So arbitrarily, the president gets to decide now what rule he likes and what rule he doesn't like. Rules are rules. So I'm waiting for Republicans someplace at some time to stand up and say, this has got to stop. And for Elon Musk to declare that Social Security was the biggest Ponzi scheme in the history of the world, no, it's not. It's a lifesaver. And the American people like it. So closing Social Security offices, that's a cut to Social Security.
Absolutely. It's making it more difficult for
a
group of people who may not be computer literate or have access to broadband. They want to go down to an office and talk to a human being about something.
That's exactly right.
All right, I got to ask I want to get you out here on time, but I just want to underscore something, which is when you pass a spending bill in Congress, and whether it's an appropriation or whether it's a big budget bill, it's law. And I never thought that the President of the United States could just say to something established as a financial appropriation law, no, we're not going to do that. Yeah. No, we're going to take that back.
Yeah, Richard Nixon tried that and lost before the Supreme Court. So that's why they use the word pause rather than cut, or the idea that they're just going to park it by the roadside until they feel like the expenditure should come about. Remember that the House of Representatives, that's where all revenue measures have to originate, whether it's tax, trade, tariffs, and
the power of the purse.
Power of the purse for good reason. And that is not to have another king. I thought at Runnymede that was decided in 1215, and I have subscribed to that fully. You serve with presidents, not under presidents. You get to question presidents. This is the regular, I think, norm now of the Republican Party. I don't know what happened to them when it comes to fiduciary responsibility. So what you're witnessing, though, is the eye roll in the elevator, the private conversation where they think this is off the rails, and then they go in and vote for it. And it's clear to me that if you let a president, any Democrat or Republican, dictate public expenditure, that'll go to their favorite initiatives. They'll decide what they want, and they won't have any congressional oversight. So I frequently quote Magna Carta, and it's a story that's made its way again. But that was when the king was subject to the same rules as the citizenry. We need to adhere to that.
Absolutely. Sir, as always, it was a pleasure speaking with you.
Great to be with you.
All right. And folks, thank you very much for tuning in to another edition of Government Matters here on Focus Springfield.